Chapter 28. True to his word, Gabe led them slowly through the drifts of snow, navigating a small deer trail until it reached a wider, well-used trail through the woods. They had to be careful as the wider trail was rutted. He explained that this was used by ATVs regularly, and as such, the ruts could cause small holes the horses couldn't see under the snow. Imogen wanted to move faster. There was a clock ticking in her head. Gabe had done a thorough job of distracting her through the night, but with the dawn came a spike in her anxiety levels. She was cold, tired, sore, and very, very worried. She kept imagining Fortune hurt and lost in the woods. After 2 hours of laborious pace, Gabe held up his hand to ask her to stop and dismounted. He waded carefully through the snow to the side of the trail, where he leaned down and inspected the ground. "Do you see something?" Imogen asked hopefully. "Stay there. I see some tracks. They're recent, but with this much snow, it's hard to say. I'm going to follow them on foot for a few." "Okay, I'll watch the horses. Shout if you need me, I can tie them and help." Gabe nodded, already moving silently into the woods. The trees were thick here, the underbrush dense. After a few minutes, Imogen grew restless. She couldn't see him at all. Was Gabe okay? No, she told herself. Stop thinking that. This wasn't his first time on a search mission. He'd told her he volunteered with the search and rescue team periodically and had training. She had to trust him. She pushed down her instinct to go after him. He told her to stay, and the last time she didn't follow his instructions, things didn't turn out so well and she had a gun in her face. He would be fine. The wind had died down significantly from the previous day, but occasional gusts would come and bat her around. After one particular gust, which had shifted from the west, both Rowdy and Dexter came to attention, picking up their heads and perking their ears. Rowdy let out a shrill whinny. Imogen sat to attention. Rowdy had been ground-tied, and he was well-trained, but Imogen did not want to be responsible for him wandering off. Rowdy called out again, listening intently. That's when Imogen heard it. An answering call. "Fortune!" Imogen was torn. She didn't know the trails and didn't want to wander off, but she could hear him. Somehow Rowdy and Dexter had sensed him, perhaps when the wind shifted, but she had no idea which direction the sound was coming. It was easy to get turned around here. "Gabe? Gabe!" Oh no, she wished she had the satellite phone. No, that wouldn't work. Didn't he say he had walkie-talkies in his pack? That would only work if he took his, and she didn't think he had. Imogen wanted so badly to let the horses lead her to him, but Gabe would never forgive her. The odds of her getting lost and him having to track her were high. She resolved to never be caught in this situation again by learning how to take care of herself in the woods. A shadow moved out of the tree line, and because Imogen was so tightly wound, she startled, spooking Dexter. "Sorry, boy. Gabe, thank goodness you're back. I heard him. I heard Fortune." Gabe looked at his horses and where their ears were pointed. "I found some tracks in a part of his blanket." He held up a long black piece of nylon with a clip on the end. The other was frayed. "It looks like he might have gone through the brush and gotten a bit stuck. One of his surcingle straps was twisted up in some brandles with some tail hair. From the way the snow is flattened there, it looks like he'd struggled for a bit and then got tired. He may have slept here overnight when the snow stopped." Her heart sank. He must have been so scared. "He's not there now?" Of course he wasn't. Gabe would have said first thing. Besides, the whinny had sounded farther away, which is why she decided not to follow it. Gabe shook his head. No, he must have finally broken free. The good news is that he might still have his blanket on, which would have protected him a bit in the cold and wind. Thank goodness for small winds. This was the first sign they'd seen of him. Between that and the whinny, they were on the right track. It shouldn't be long now. Gabe handed Imogen the broken strap. "Which direction did the whinny come from?" "I'm not sure, honestly. I think it came from that direction." She pointed to the southwest. Gabe nodded and mounted up again. "That's good news, closer to home. He must have started to head back that way. Let's see if we can catch up with him." Imogen nodded, clucking her horse to move. While it was still deep snow and they couldn't move quickly, There was a sense of urgency. They traveled in that direction for another mile, then stopped to listen. "Call for him," Gabe urged. "Fortune!" The sound echoed through the woods and surprised a red-tailed hawk nestled on a tree branch. He launched into the air with a scream. Imogen winced. "Sorry." Gabe laughed. "Again, Jersey, call him again. I thought I heard something." Imogen did as he asked, cupping her hands around her mouth and adding a whistle. She'd been playing with using different sounds while working with him. "There, I hear him." Gabe urged Rowdy slightly off course, towards a denser deer trail. It was so thick with downed trees on either side that she would hardly have known it was there. Trusting him to know best, she followed. After a few minutes of weaving around trees and brush, Gabe spotted movement in the distance. He stopped, Imogen pulling up alongside to look. There he was. Fortune must have been following their horses' whinnies or Imogen's shouts, because there he was, walking stiffly toward them. His blanket was a ripped mess, half on him and half ripped and dragging behind him on the ground and caught on one leg. Every few steps, his hind leg would step on it, forcing him to stumble. But he was alive. Imogen and Gabe both dismounted, moving slowly so they wouldn't spook the scared and tired horse. He was clearly spent. His head was hanging low, his hooves dragging on the ground, and he looked like he was going to go down. If that happened, it wouldn't be good. Gabe handed Imogen the rope halter with lead. She picked her way toward him carefully, crooning all the while. "What a good boy, you found us. We've been looking for you. Are you ready to come home?" He looked like he was on his last legs. Imogen wanted to cry, whether out of fear for her horse or relief, she wasn't sure. He stood still while she tied his rope halter, nuzzling her gently as she did. She scratched his forehead. "You big lug. I know you like adventure, but maybe next time, wait for me." Gabe had tied his horses to a tree branch and made his way over to inspect the horse. They had to get him back quickly, but first he had to cut away the blanket and check for injuries. He told Imogen as much, and before he could do so himself, she unlatched the knife from her belt, the knife he'd gifted her, and deftly cut away the blanket where it snagged around him. He nodded in thanks, surprised by her anticipating him and stepping up to do what was needed. She'd make a fine search and rescue team member, he thought. Then, while Imogen talked softly to her horse, he ran his hands down Fortune's body, checking for swelling and cuts. "He's got a pretty nasty gash on his left hind, Imogen. I'll need to cut away the proud flesh and stitch it. That will have to wait until we get him home. For now, I'll get the alfalfa pellets out of my pack. I have a collapsible water bowl I'll bring over to you so you can fill it with snow. I have a small bottle of electrolytes we can add to it. It's not much, but it's something. He's dehydrated and likely hasn't eaten since yesterday." Is he going to be okay? He hadn't been in her life for very long, but Imogen couldn't imagine a life without him in it. He'd become synonymous with Vermont in her heart. Gabe sighed and rubbed a gloved hand over his face. He didn't want to lie to her. The threat wasn't over. "We found him, that's what matters. We'll get a little food and water in him, then pony him back home. The good news is we aren't far, but we'll have to look for infection and other injuries, not to mention colic. He's not out of the woods, but I'll do my best." Colic? I thought that was like gas or something. Imogen remembered horses having it, but she couldn't remember all the details. It's an umbrella term that can refer to stomach upset or something more serious like a twist in the intestines. There are a lot of causes, and it can be dangerous. He'll need to be under close watch for the next few days. Imogen nodded. "I'm never leaving him again." Gabe worked swiftly, treating and covering the wound as best he could while in the middle of the woods. "I'm sure that's not necessary, Jersey. Let's just focus on getting him back. We're 2 more miles from the house, and this will all be over." He didn't want to say it, but it was far from over. Fortune's gums were pale, and he was clearly exhausted. This had been extremely traumatic for him, and if he colicked, there was always the possibility he wouldn't make it. Imogen didn't need to know that yet, and Gabe would do anything in his power to prevent it. Fortune was a strong horse. He had to believe that. Imogen watched Gabe take point and field treat the horse. After he'd had some snow water and alfalfa pellets, she was incredibly relieved to see him perk up a little. They were lucky to have found him when they did. She didn't want to think what would have happened otherwise. "That's all I can do for now. We better get moving. The quicker we get home, the better." Imogen agreed completely. She wanted to get him in his paddock, cry in his mane, then take a long, hot bath. In another year or two, she hoped this would be just a very bad memory she could chalk up to an adventure they had one time. How are we going to get him back? The brush was dense. It would be slow going, even more so because of the injured horse. "I'll pony him and lead. You stay behind and shout if he wants to go down. That's my biggest concern right now. If he collapses, we might not be able to get him up." He didn't have to explain why. She could see it in his eyes. Swallowing heavily, she looked up at the sky and tried to force back the tears that threatened to well. Neither Fortune nor Gabe needed her to lose it right now, not when they were so close. Sniffling, she turned back to him. "You can count on me. I'll do what needs to be done." Gabe nodded, and she walked the horse over to the other horses slowly. Handing Gabe the lead, she looked up at him. "Thank you for taking care of us all." He nodded again before mounting. Gabe deftly arranged himself so he was holding the reins with his left hand and the exhausted horse with the right. He gave it some slack so Fortune could stay just at Rowdy's flank. There was power in numbers out here, and herd mentality might keep Fortune going when he wanted to give up. For now, Gabe would pick his way out of this area and find more even ground.